What's going on, everybody? It's your boy, That Guy Mile High, tuning back in for another reaction, and we got one that y'all been asking for. Not necessarily this one specifically, but definitely some reactions to it's either MrBallen or MrBallen. I like MrBallen, so we're gonna go ahead and call him MrBallen. If I'm wrong, all right, it's MrBallen. But either way, I like MrBallen, and yeah. So, anyways, we got the female Hannible Lector giving the harshest sentence, like. Yeah, let's get into this, bro. I read the title and was like, interesting. All right, we should do that. Everyone wants to see us do some MrBallen, and that one sounds crazy. So record the screen, hit the full screen. Yeah, we got female Hannible Lector giving harshest sentence possible. You do see in the title it says mature audiences only. Okay, mature audiences only. That is your fair warning. That's all I gotta say. Mature audiences only. Let go.
Today's story is about a crime so horrific that a judge handed down a sentence that had never been given before in Australian history. This story is exceptionally graphic.
Like, what could
As
you...
such, viewer discretion.
Before we get into this, like, obviously he's about to break it down, but like off tops, like what could you possibly do to get the worst possible sentence? Like, we know. And what really, audience, what's the worst possible sentence that you would get? Like, other than like death row and the death sentence and shit. Like, I mean, what, you know what I mean? Like, what else is there to get? Like, and obviously we've seen people do that. You know, all sorts of crazy murderers and serial killers and all sorts of stuff. Like, you know, it happens. You know what I mean? But yeah, like, I'm curious. Like, I'm really curious to know what was done that was so heinous to warrant the worst possible sentence or the harshest sentence ever in Austria or Australia.
But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once or twice every week. So if that's of interest to you, please offer to spray the like button's face with sunscreen, but instead use bear spray. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Before we get into today's story, I want to talk to you about today's sponsor. Honey, are you tired of paying full price for your...
All right. Disturbing. As you see right there, we're going to leave it up right there. Warning, disturbing images and statements. Viewer discretion is advised. Do you dig what I'm saying? Advised. I don't know if my hand's in the right spot, but you know, somewhere around here in the screen, I might even be covering it up. But warning, you see the warning. You see the big warning sign, okay? This is your opportunity to click off if you are, you know, weak. And you got a weak stomach and you kind of a cluster, you know what I'm saying? This is your opportunity to click off, all right?
In 1955, Catherine Knight had the misfortune of being born into a highly dysfunctional and abusive household. Not only was she badly mistreated by her alcoholic parents,
I think that's like
older siblings, she was also scorned by
I think that's like all of like the serial killers and like people who do super crazy heinous crimes. Like it's a 50-50 shot. Like they either go on to do something amazing and great and have this, you know, crazy story to tell, or they go off and do something really horrible and heinous and, you know, again, have a crazy story to tell. But, you know, it's a 50-50 shot. Either way.
Simply because they didn't like her family. Catherine lived in a very small town in New South Wales, Australia, where basically everybody knew each other's business. But despite the
I couldn't do that, man.
Catherine
that small town life shit.
On the future.
I don't like the idea. Sorry to keep positive, but I don't like the idea of like everybody knowing my shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, granted, like I live in Denver. It's not like a super big city. It's not super tiny. Like, it's, you know, I feel like we're in the middle somewhere, you know what I mean? We got a lot of people, we don't got enough people type shit. Like, but just enough people that, you know, not everybody's in your shit, but not enough people that not everybody's not in your shit. You dig what I'm saying?
Would tell herself that as much as my life is miserable right now, in the future I will have a family of my own and I will take care of them the way I wish my family had taken care of me. But when Catherine became a young woman and began dating men, all of her relationships would always crash and burn because inevitably she and her partner would become toxic and abusive and it would end the relationship. It was like Catherine both didn't know how to be a quality partner and didn't know how to identify a quality partner. Likely because,
I mean, yeah, when you grow up and see, you know what I'm saying, the examples that are given like from your parents, your grandparents, your aunts, uncles, brothers and sisters, like you see all these dysfunctional ass relationships. Yeah, like you dysfunctional. You're probably like a 99% gonna be in a dysfunctional relationship, because it's just what you know. It's what is normal to you. It's what you think is okay and acceptable in a relationship. You know, like it's just that whole like saying the apple doesn't fall far from the tree kind of situation. So if you have good examples of relationships, 9 times out of 10 you're probably gonna be in a great relationship yourself. If you have bad examples, 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to be in some bad relationships yourself. Not saying that the ones that have good examples aren't going to fail and mess up and have some bad relationships that are super toxic, or not saying that the ones that have bad examples can't, you know, fuck up and have some good relationships that, you know, have no toxicity at all and are just great and they thrive. But the reality is the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So the chances are that you're going to just kind of follow the footsteps of the examples that you have. Highly likely. Okay.
She didn't know what that looked like. She had been raised in this horrible household.
Facts.
But in 1995, when Catherine was 40 and really starting to feel desperate for someone to actually love and to love her back, she would meet a man named John Price, who was also 40, and he just seemed fundamentally different than every other man she'd ever dated.
That could be a good thing and a bad thing.
And he seemed to really care for her and really wanted to kind of take her under his wing and love her.
He either saw the weakness in her or saw somebody who was just damaged and needed help.
And in return, it seemed very much like John had fallen.
One is good intentions and one is terrible intentions.
Catherine moved into John's house where he lived with his 3 young daughters, who right away took a liking to her. And so for the first time, Catherine felt like her life was really going the way she wanted it to go. But unfortunately, this would not last. Despite the seemingly perfect start to Catherine and John's relationship, it eventually began to sour when Catherine began to ask John if they were ever going to get married. Catherine really wanted to get married. She wanted to kind of officially have a family of her own that she could take care of, but John was weary of marriage because he had just left a failed marriage, and he told Catherine that realistically, he might never want to get married again. And so over time, that
right there probably crushed her whole, like, spirit. You know what I'm saying? Like, someone who just all she wants is to have her own family and be accepted in, like, a group of people that, you know, she can call her own, and you to tell her that, like, that, you know, may not be a possibility to be it, you know, the exact way, picture perfect, you know, princess story that you kind of envision in your mind. Like, you know, that's not an unfair thing to, like, tell somebody when you've had a bad marriage and relationship previously and have, like, a bad taste for it in your mouth. Like, you know, it's better. I feel like it's better to just be honest about that than not. So, but I can see where that would, like, make her, like, you know, like she started twitching and shit. You know what I mean? Like, you what? You what? You know what I'm saying? Like, I can see the twitch happen.
Really drove the two apart, and it all came to a head in early February of 2000 when John and Catherine were at his house. They were in the kitchen, and they got into a heated fight over marriage, and then before long, they were both getting physical with each other. And during this altercation, Catherine kind of scrambled and grabbed a knife on the counter and actually slashed John across the chest. And as soon as she did this, the fight came to an end. John screamed at her to leave the apartment and never come back, but Catherine was already storming out of the apartment. They both understood that
she had a fucking, you know what I mean?
Their relationship was now over. But over the following days and weeks, Catherine, who had moved into a different apartment at this time, kind of near where John was living, she felt very lonely, and even though she knew her relationship with John was not a healthy one, she longed to patch things up with him. She didn't like being alone. She wanted to have that family. And so she decided she would do what she had previously done in other relationships to kind of patch up the relationship after a fight. And so the way she would do this is she would kind of make sure they had the house to themselves, and then she would show up in lingerie, and they would have kind of an intimate makeup moment, and then everything would go back to normal.
Trying to have that makeup sex, like, you know, yeah, we fought so that we could have this great sex and intimate moment, and then we go back to our regular lives. Like, that's some toxic shit. If you can't, like, if you don't know what toxicity is in a relationship, that is toxic. I'm just gonna throw it out there. As much as we all love some makeup sex, as much as we all love to, you know what I'm saying, get, you know what I mean, a little rough when we're getting intimate. You know what I mean? It's toxic. You know what I'm saying? That shit right there is toxic.
On February 29th, Catherine waited until she knew John had left for work, and she went over to his place, and she had a key to it still, and she went inside, and his 3 daughters were there, and so Catherine said hello, and she chatted with the kids for a minute, and then she made arrangements for the 3 kids to go get picked up by a babysitter and spend the night outside of the house. And so then when the babysitter came by the house and picked up the 3 girls, Catherine said goodbye to them, and then Catherine left John's place, and she went out to get her lingerie. Later in the evening, when John came back to his house, he went inside and he found his kids weren't there, but there was a note from Catherine that explained where his kids were and how she wanted to make up with him and she would be back in a little while. Now, John was not happy about this. He was angry that she had decided to just come into his house without asking him. That felt very violating.
Yeah.
And then also she made a decision about his kids without talking to him. That just felt so offensive and wrong of her to do. And so John grabs a beer out of the fridge, he sits down in the living room, and he begins to wait for Catherine to show up. The next morning at 6 a.m., John was supposed to be at work already, but he wasn't. And so his company, who knew he was very reliable, were concerned something was wrong. And so they sent a worker to his property to see what was going on. And so the worker, he pulls up in front of John's house. You know, John's car is in the driveway. And so the worker's first thought is, oh, I guess John must have overslept. And so the worker walks up onto John's front porch and he knocks on John's front door, but there's no answer. And so the worker knocks again, still no answer. And so this guy turns around to leave and go back and tell the company, look, I don't know what's going on. But as he's turning around, he notices on the very bottom of the outside of the door, kind of near the edge, the front
Look, I was about to say,
door,
he was going to find something crazy.
there looked to be some blood on the outside of the door. It was pretty easy to tell it was blood. And so the worker was immediately very concerned, and he knocked again on the door, but no answer. And so he ran around to the side of the building, and he began banging on the windows of John's house to hopefully rouse whoever was in there to come out and to make sure things were okay, but there was silence. And so the worker ran back to his car, he drove back to his office, and after he told his boss what he had found, they decided they had to call the police.
Nice.
The police would show up at John's residence at 8 a.m., and when they got there, John's vehicle was still in the driveway, the house was quiet and dark, and so the police, they walked up to the front door, they knocked on the door, there's no answer, it's silence, and so they walk around to the back of the property to try the back door, and as they're walking into the backyard, they see in the middle of the grass, right behind a window that led into the house, there was this plate of food that had been clearly thrown out of the house and landed face down on the grass. And so the police see that, they're thinking that's pretty weird. And so what they do first, before even going to the back door, is they turn to the window, which clearly the food had been thrown out of, but whoever had done it had then shut the window. And so they go over to the glass and press their faces up against it and peer.
He didn't want the food. He was like, your food. Threw that shit out the window like, you know what I'm saying?
Inside, and there's no John, there's no people, there's nothing inside, it's dark, but right inside of this window is this big dining room table, and it's covered with this amazing spread of food. It looks like a Thanksgiving Day meal had been prepared, but then no one had eaten from it. And so they're thinking, okay, well, for whatever reason, one of these plates of food was thrown out the window. That's very odd. And so the police come off the window, they walk over to the back door, they knock a few more times, but after even more silence, they kick the back door down and they go inside. As soon as they step in, there's two officers. They walk straight into the house with the dining room table with all that food on their left, and there's nothing that stands out. They're calling for John. It's silent. Everything is off. Everything is quiet. And they keep on walking into what appears to be the living room where the TV is and where there's a couch. And as soon as they walk in, they see there's blood everywhere. And towards the front of the living room, where the front door actually opened into the house, there was a very obvious pool of blood. Basically, if you stepped into the house, you'd be stepping into this puddle of blood. And as they're looking at this pool of blood, they see there is a distinct blood trail from the pool back into the living room that they have just walked into, and the trail kind of leads behind a couch out of their view. And so they walk around the couch to see what's at the end of this trail, and they find Catherine Knight's crumpled body on the ground. And so right away they rush over to her and they feel for a pulse, and they discover that she actually does have a pulse, but very obviously she's clinging to life, barely. And so one of the officers stays with Catherine while they're calling in paramedics to come in and
that took a crazy turn, bro. Like, I was not expecting them to say that they found her. I was expecting it to be him. Like, whoa. Like, my brain is like, my brain just like malfunctioned for a second, because that's not what I was expecting him to say. That was a crazy turn of events right there, people. What? Now we gotta keep going. We gotta figure out what happened. Why is it that she is behind the couch? Do you know what I'm saying? Bloody and everything. Like I'm like, is she faking it? Did she kill him and then she's trying to then she tried to get rid of herself? What is going on, bro? I'm confused. I'm so confused.
While the other officer draws their weapon and they begin searching the rest of the house. And so the officer walks past the front door on their left and they go into the other side of the first floor, which is basically like this lounge room, kind of like a secondary living room. And as they're looking out across this room, they see there's no one in it. But there appears to be this curtain blocking the entrance to some other side room. And this officer, as they're looking at it, they look down and they notice there's another blood trail that starts from the front of the house. It snakes all the way across this lounge room and kind of disappears into this covered up room. And so this officer yells out for John, but there's no answer. And so he ends up going.
See, okay, look, okay, now look. I think she got him, and then she tried to get herself, and she crawled behind the couch. That's my speculation right now.
All the way across, checking as he's going, looking around, but there's no one there, and he gets to this towel, and with his non-shooting hand, he kind of pushes it out of the way, and he looks inside of this space, and it turns out to just be a small closet. There was nothing of note inside. It didn't really make sense that the blood trail had led to this closet. But then, as the officer was kind of wondering why the blood trail ended here, he started to feel something cold on his non-shooting arm, and so he looked down at his arm, and he saw there was this huge streak of blood on his arm, and he knew he had not been wounded in some way. This was not his blood. So how did he get blood all over him? And then he stepped back in horror because he realized the curtain that he had just moved with the arm that had blood on it was not a curtain. The night before, John sat in his living room waiting for Catherine to return, very angrily waiting for her to come back. But by 11 p.m., she hadn't.
Bruh, are you about to tell me she skinned him? Oh my God. This is where the Hannible Lector part comes in.
John, he works super early in the morning. He's very tired. He decides
she loosened the skin and skinned this nigga.
He climbs into bed. He falls asleep. And then about an hour or so later, Catherine would walk into the bedroom. She had her black lingerie on that she had bought earlier in the day. And even though John was furious with her and very upset with what she had done that day, seeing her like this suddenly made him think, you know what? All my issues with her can wait. And before long, they were getting intimate together in the bed. And then they fell asleep in each other's arms.
Man.
Later in the night, Catherine would wake up. John's still fast asleep, so she's looking right at him, and she suddenly has this intense sense of disgust. She was convinced that he was taking advantage of her, that the reason he didn't want to marry her was he was just kind of using her. And this anger inside of her boiled up, and she decided right then and there that I need to teach this man a lesson he will never forget. And so Catherine very quietly slipped out of the bed. John's still sleeping. She snuck out of the bedroom. She made her way out of the house, and she got into her car, and she drove across town to the apartment she had been staying in for the past couple of weeks, and she grabbed her work tools. Catherine, where she worked full-time, was a meat processing factory, and she worked on the kill floor with the animals that are being turned into meat. And so her skill set was butchering, and her tools were butcher's knives. And so she grabs her kit of butcher's knives, and she...
Bruh, I told you she broke. She said... I'm gonna get you. Like, oh man.
Drives back to John's place. She goes into the house. She makes her way into the kitchen, and she unrolls this kit full of different sized butcher knives, and she picks the one she wants. She pulls it out. She makes sure it's nice and sharp, and then she made her way into John's bedroom. When she got into his bedroom, John was still asleep. He was lying on his back, covers up over him, fast asleep, and she climbed onto the bed, being very careful not to wake him. And then when she was straddling him kind of on her knees right over his midsection, she raised the knife up between her two hands, and she brought it down into his chest. John immediately shot up, bucking Catherine off of him. She went flying onto the floor, and then instinctively, John just begins running out of his bedroom. He has no idea what's happening. He's been stabbed, but he probably can't even feel it. It's all adrenaline. He's just running through the house. But by the time he gets to the front of the house, the blood loss had caused him to be so weak he could barely stand. And so he managed to open the front door, but then he collapsed onto the ground halfway between the inside and outside outside of the house. And so laying there, he reached out with his bloody hand and he grabbed the edge of the door that was partially open and tried to pull himself out of the house. And that's how that bloody print was left on the outside of the door that the worker saw.
Bro.
And as he's trying to pull himself out of the house, Catherine, who had gotten up after being knocked off the bed, she ran to the front of the house and she grabbed his legs and she pulled him back into the house and then shut the door. And then once he was inside, she got on top of him and stabbed him an additional 36 times all over his body.
Holy, that is personal. You do not stab somebody like 36 times and it just be not personal. Like, that was so personal, it couldn't have been more personal. Like, golly.
And she left him there to bleed to death. And so while he's dying, she goes into the kitchen and she puts on a large pot of water to boil. And then she begins setting the plates all around the dining room table.
She cooked him. That's what the plates are. Oh my God, bro. She butchered him and cooked this dude. Oh my God. Oh my God. I mean, I guess it is Hannible Lector, and that's what he did. He ate people. He skinned these motherfuckers. He butchered them and he ate them. Oh man.
For a big family meal. After she was done setting the table, she went back
bro,
over
that
to
is
John,
crazy.
At this point, and she dragged him all the way across that lounge room on the other side of the house.
Bro, she ate him. Walked through and then at least cooked him.
She dragged him all the way across that room to right in front of that closet, and then using her expert skills from working in the meat factory, she proceeded to skin John from his neck all the way down to his toe. And she was so good at it that she was able to skin him in one piece. And she took this skin suit and she draped it.
She was so good at it, she was able to skin him in one piece. Like,
over the entrance to this closet. And then she removed John's head from the now skinned torso and she placed it in the water that she had put on to boil earlier. She was going to use his head to turn it into some sort of broth or gravy. And then she grabbed his skinned torso and dragged it into the kitchen and began butchering it and then making different dishes with his meat, different pies and casseroles. And then after she had made this enormous feast out of John's body, she set the food all around the table that she had already laid out, and then she made little placards, little name cards that had the names of each of John's children on them, and she placed them in front of each of the plates because her intention was to feed them their father. And then Catherine sat down at a plate that she had made for herself, and she began eating John, except it made her sick, and so she opened the window behind her, and she threw her plate of food out into the backyard. And then when she turned back...
She began to eat John, but it started to make her sick. So she threw it out the window, like, bruh.
And looked at what she had done, she decided that instead of facing the consequences, she would just take her own life. And so she went into the bathroom, she grabbed some sleeping pills, and then she cut across the front of the house, walking through that pool of blood near the door. She made her way into the living room, she overdosed on sleeping pills, and collapsed on the ground. However, when the paramedics finally showed up the following morning, they were able to save her. And so once she stabilized in the hospital, she was promptly arrested for John's murder. She would ultimately be found guilty. However, she would never take any responsibility. And then during her sentencing phase, she was...
What do you mean you should never take responsibility? What?
Life in prison. But the judge made a special clause just for her. He told them that her file needed to be stamped, literally stamped, never to be released. Basically, there was no hope ever of her getting out of prison. And so after she was taken away, she would become the first woman in Australian history to be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She's still alive today. So that's going to do it, guys. If you got something out of today's
holy
episode
cow, bro.
Already, please
like the fact that she was ready to feed this dude's kids his body. Like, oh man, that's nuts. She's crazy. Yeah. I mean, granted, so we did know, like, obviously it was either life without parole or, you know, the death penalty were like the ultimate, you know, end results of this. But it is crazy to think that she was the first woman that ever got a life sentence with no possibility of parole. And stamped. Never to be released. She's crazy. Do not ever let her out. Ever let her out. I'm gonna say it again. Ever let her out. Okay? Her skill sets are too good. She skinned this man in one piece, made a broth out of his head, made all sorts of chops and pies and all sorts of things, man. She's Sweeney Todd, fucking Hannible Lector, goddamn motherfucking. She's nasty, goddamn it. What the? It's crazy. Ever let her out. Don't ever let her out. Yeah. Y'all let me know. Y'all let me know about that down in the comments below. And y'all need to be careful out there. Y'all need to be looking for the twitches. You know what I'm saying? When a motherfucker start twitching when you say something that he shouldn't be or she shouldn't be twitching for, that's a sign. That's a red flag. It's time to go. Okay? The toxicity levels are too high. This is Chernobyl in this bitch. All right? The radiation is going to overcome and you will be taken out. Okay? Do not play the games with the Chernobyl type motherfuckers. They break and it's over. It's over. You end up skinned in pies. Oh man, that's crazy. Anyways, man, I'll catch you on the next one. And yeah.